Welcome to the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. We have football this weekend, Greg. Saturday in Ireland, ironically enough, there is college football being played. Looking forward to seeing what happens between Florida State and Georgia Tech.
Oh yeah, I mean it's getting to be that time of year. There's some big games early on too. I guess they call it week zero in college football.
Yeah, we get 3 weeks of week zero, right? That's what the preseason is for you and me and everybody else involved in the NFL.
Yeah.
Um,
As you know, and it was, by the way, it was great seeing you, great spending time with you last week. We had a
Absolutely.
lot of fun. You know how much I love coming down to Nashville. Very informative and entertaining. Got a chance to talk to some coaches, and then the great thing about being in Nashville is so many former players live there. So, I got a chance to talk with Tim Hasselbeck, Matt Castle, all guys that live in the area, came to practice. And I tell you, who I got to meet, great kid was Mark Mariani. Great
Yeah.
guy.
Mark is a trip, isn't he? He's
Oh
he's
my
a fan
God.
favorite around here.
He
Absolutely.
almost had me ready to move to Montana.
That is a special kind of energy that one has to have if he's
Yeah.
convincing you to move to Montana. Well, good. I'm glad you enjoyed your trip down here. I know Titans fans enjoyed the conversation between you and Denard Wilson, and happy to just be a facilitator and get the hell out of your guys' way. But it was really good and, like you said, informative. And there were a lot of former players in attendance at practice. I know you mentioned Channing Crowder and Fred
Oh
Taylor.
yeah,
A chance
Fred
to
Taylor,
watch
Channing Crowder, Ryan Clark, they were there as well.
Keith Bullock taken in practice. A lot of
Yeah.
former NFL greats hovering around the facility the last couple of weeks. Briefly, Greg, because preseason game number 3 is going to be interesting. They're going to play the starters, and that's not necessarily normal, but I guess it depends from coach to coach how they like to organize these things. Preseason game number 2 was exactly not that. 38 players did not play in this game, but I know you had a couple of guys that you decided to spotlight anyway.
Well, I wanted to watch Chance Campbell for the simple reason that, he played, I think, all but 2 snaps,
Mhm.
and he's played a lot in the preseason. And I do remember watching him at Ole Miss, and he was a tackling machine. He's actually got pretty good size. I think he's in the 6'2" range, probably 230. Obviously, he's not the best athlete or the ideal athlete you want at the linebacker position. But, and again, all I'm doing is watching him, Buck. I don't want to get caught up in people immediately telling me, well, he didn't play against the starters. Of course, I know that, I mean,
Right.
that's not news to me. But I'm trying to look at traits. I've always learned and was taught this by people smarter than I, that when you watch a player, you really try to isolate what they do. That's all you can do. I mean, it's like when scouts watch players who are from smaller schools. Of course, they're not playing against Alabama or Georgia, but you still have to evaluate them. So you watch how they play, you look for their traits, their attributes, their characteristics. And, I thought he played physically, which is different than being powerful, by the way. And that's an important distinction. There are a lot of linebackers that are physical, but they're not necessarily powerful. But I thought that he did show some stack and shed ability versus O lineman. There'll be questions about that, though, overall, but he did show that. But he's clearly an aggressive, high motor player. I thought he played with vision. I thought he played with instincts. He was quick to see things in the run game, which allowed him to play with a quick trigger, shot gaps at times. I mean, again, take it for what it's worth, and you're there every day, so you know more about the whole situation than I do. But I would say, and I'm not seeing him in practice every day, obviously, but seeing him in the game, I looked at this kid and said, you know what, there's a place for him in the NFL.
Yeah, and that's what the feeling has been since John Robinson drafted him in the 6th round out of Ole Miss, Greg. And it's just been injuries that have taken
Yeah.
away from his first 2 seasons in the league. But they are very high on Chance Campbell. I won't say very high. Obviously, he's not a starter at this point. They favor Gibbons over him. And obviously Gibbons played a good deal of football down the stretch last year, but they really like both Chance Campbell's effort, obviously, and what he provides as in a supplementary role. Because at some point backups are going to play, and this guy I think has acquitted himself pretty well because he has done this during practice too.
Yeah, and those guys to me, and I'm being honest, I mean, I've been doing this a long time, but it's not like, no one gets everybody right when you evaluate players, okay? And I find guys like that particularly a linebacker, difficult to evaluate for this reason. It's obvious they're not high-level athletes. That's easy to say. Any scout could look at Chance Campbell and say, gee, he's not, he's not a super high-level great athlete. Okay. Although his measurables are not terrible, he's not a great athlete. So now you have to look at him and you have to say to yourself, okay, so if he's not a great athlete, what does he have to be good at to play stacked backer? He's got to be really good with what we call key and diagnose. He's got to see it so he can play with a quick trigger, because he's not going to make plays based on being the best athlete on the field. He's going to make plays in the run game in particular, because he's not likely to play as a sub defense player. He's probably a base defense type linebacker, maybe even nickel, but on first down, he probably wouldn't play a nickel on 3rd and 9. So what does he have to be good at? Key and diagnose, quick trigger, being able to play off blocks to some degree, what we call stack and shed. Those are the things he has to be good at. It showed up on that tape. Now, again, like I said, we can debate, he's not playing against the stars and all that, but you saw that. Yeah. And so with guys like that, I think to myself, 6th round pick, but he did play in the SEC where he made a lot of tackles. Could this guy be a starting linebacker in your base defense and be a pretty good player? I mean, I'll give you an example of a guy you know of because he went to your alma mater, and that's McFadden from the Giants.
Yeah.
Mike McFadden was a starting linebacker for the Giants last year in their base defense and played well. And to me, they're somewhat similar. And I'd be curious, look, if Campbell could end up starting. I mean, I'm not saying he will or won't, but he could.
Yeah, all they're looking for is the coaching staff is competition and getting to know Frank Bush a little bit. This is his second stint here, obviously, but my first time covering the team with Frank.
And about his 30th year in the league, by the way.
He's been around a long time, Frank Bush. But there is constant praise from both the coaching staff and the players about the way that Frank Bush helps develop guys. So I think we're seeing Chance Campbell and even Otis Reese, even though he's in the concussion protocol, be the beneficiaries of that. I wanted to touch quickly on Jaylen Harrell, Greg, because we are going to preview the AFC North and NFC North in today's podcast. But Harrell is somebody who is going to make this team and right now is scheduled to be the 3rd edge rusher on the depth chart. Played well against the Seahawks over the weekend. And we've talked about it a lot with Denard Wilson.
And by the way, good news on Arden Key, obviously. I'm sure they're very happy down
Huge news on Arden Key. Yeah.
But, Harrell was another guy. 7th round pick, obviously played for the national champion Michigan Wolverines. Long, athletic, didn't show quite enough on any kind of consistent basis in Michigan, or he would have been more than a 7th round pick. But watching the tape from this week and also seeing him in person last week, because he's one of those guys when you see in person, you go, wow, the body type's pretty good. He showed both speed to power conversion in the game. He showed some lateral quickness as an edge pass rusher. I thought he showed up well. Again, I'm not there every day at practice, and you're talking to coaches more than I am, but I thought he showed enough to where you think that there's something there to be brought out of him.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. He continues to be active around the football, and that's kind of something that we talked about after the draft, Greg, you and I, about knowing that this guy had traits, being a productive player in a good Michigan defense, but trying to figure out, all right, how much is him versus how much is he benefiting off of or benefiting based on the defense that he's in, because there were a lot of talented players in Michigan.
Well, and that's why, Buck, it's important to look at the player. Like I said, you isolate the traits.
Yeah.
Because he's playing, next to, Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, and they had the linebackers Colson and Barrett, good players in college football. Obviously, they're national champions. You still have to look at the individual player. And you have to watch. That's what I do anyway. I watch him. I try to really isolate it and slow it down. How does he use his hands? How does he get off the ball? Can he play off contact? Because obviously in the NFL, as an edge pass rusher, you're not just running around offensive tackles. The great pass rushers, and I'm certainly not saying Jaylen Harrell is a great pass rusher, but the great pass rushers are really good initiating and playing off contact. You got to be able to do that. If there's no power element to your game, it's really hard to be a good edge pass rusher.
Yeah, he doesn't have to be great. He just has to be good at something that they can deploy him within their defense, and that's kind of the mold that Jaylen Harrell is trying to fill right now. Okay, so we'll have some interesting things to talk about, I'm sure, out of the preseason game in New Orleans, because we'll have a couple of weeks until that season opener against the Chicago Bears, and obviously we'll have Chiefs and Ravens on
What day
tap.
is that preseason game, Buck?
That preseason game is Sunday at 1 p.m., Greg.
Oh, so it's the last one of the weekend, I imagine.
It's one of the last ones, and I'm
Yeah,
very upset about it. I'd kill for a Thursday preseason game, but what are
I
you gonna
know.
do?
I know. It's Sunday. Okay.
Yeah, Sunday road preseason, but
I know. I know.
like I said, it's the best job in the world. I'm not here to complain about it. Anyway, so AFC North, NFC North is what we're going to cover today on the podcast as we continue division previews ahead of this NFL regular season. We'll start with the AFC North, Greg, the reigning MVP of the league, Lamar Jackson, the reigning AFC North champion, Baltimore Ravens. Their coaching staff got pilfered, and they seem to always have players leave in free agency to take big money contracts, but they've always been a good team at supplementing that talent in the draft. Of course, the notable addition this year is Derrick Henry, who Titans fans are intimately familiar with. And I wonder how you view those two pieces, Lamar and Derrick, in this Todd Monken system, where they're clearly going to have to make some adjustments.
Yeah, they're going to run the ball. And you know what, Henry, even though he's never been really a shotgun back, I'm sure he'll acclimate to that. It's a different deal. So, I'm sure he's worked through that in OTAs and training camp. But they do run the ball. I mean, it's not a case where this is a pass first, throw it all over the yard team by any stretch of the imagination. So, he may not get the 380 carries he got in Nashville, but he's going to get carries. He's their number one back without question. They do have, they're likely to start. I think they would like the rookie right tackle to be the starter, Roger Rosengarten from the University of Washington. They've got a few changes on their O-line. So that has to be worked through. Changes on the O-line, particularly in the run game, where cohesion is so critically important. Not that it's not in the pass game, but in run game, it's so critically important. That could take a little time to work through. The receivers are the same. Lamar is Lamar. I mean, he'll still run. He'll still make throws. He's a really good player. So their offense, while they have a few things that need to be, I would call a little bit of a work in progress, it'll still be a good offense.
They lose Mike McDonald on defense.
Yeah.
They obviously lose several coaches on defense, and Zach Orr is going to be the defensive coordinator there. Their defense, Greg, at least last year, they were built successfully to not have to bring additional pressure, right? They're one of the more skilled teams at getting pressure with four, depending on which four that is, and having the numbers advantage in coverage. I'm going to be curious to see how that Ravens defense adapts, if at all, because they're still largely constructed the same way, even though they lose Patrick Queen to the Pittsburgh Steelers, which I'm sure is a sticking point for Ravens fans. But for the most part, that spine of the defense is so solid, and I'm fascinated to see what Orr's tendencies are as a play caller.
Yeah, and we don't know that, although I imagine the structure of the defense will be the same. Obviously the draft is where when you might lose players. They drafted in the third round last year Trenton Simpson from Clemson, who's a really gifted athlete. We'll see if I would imagine he's the number one player that they would like to take the spot of Patrick Queen to play next to Roquan Smith. Really, when you look at their defense, other than Queen, they have not really lost a ton of players.
Mm-hmm.
Kyle Hamilton is as versatile a player as there is in the league. Plays safety in their base, played a ton of slot last year, and was so critical in a Mike McDonald defense. And as I said, I would assume Zach Orr will keep a lot of the structure similar. Hamilton was so important as the nickel. He played a ton of snaps at nickel. And even when Arthur Merlette played nickel, he was a really good player for them. So, and Kyle Van Noy is just one of those guys, keeps on playing. He's just one of those guys. He's just smart, understands. Justin Matabuke came on last year to be one of the best D tackles in the league. We started to see Adafe always become a little bit more of a pass rusher, playing to his traits. Obviously, they lost Clowney, and Clowney had his best year ever as a pass rusher. So that's a role they have to fill. But this will still be a good defense, Buck.
The Browns made the playoffs last year. I don't want to say in spite of their quarterback, because their quarterback, Joe Flacco, helped get them to the playoffs. But Deshaun Watson is the starter there. Greg, it's got to be such a perplexing watch for you in particular to know what Deshaun Watson has been in his career. and to see what he's been since he's been a Cleveland Brown, some of the decision making that just can't be explained other than what, from
Yeah.
Deshaun Watson's perspective, and obviously we can't get inside his head, but the scheme that the scheme that they want to run in Cleveland is still going to be predicated on running the football. I just don't know how you adjust for the variable that is their quarterback situation that should be one of the more consistent positions on the field.
Yeah, we don't, and we just don't know the answer. So I can't, we don't know. I mean,
Right.
Watson has hardly played football in what, 3 years? So we just don't know. So having said that, they still have a really good O line. I guess some guys may start on pup. I'm not sure, but they still, when healthy, they've got one of the best O lines in football. I don't know what Nick Chubb's status is to start the season. Do you know by any chance what his?
Uh, Last I looked, he was going to be available at the start of the regular season,
Yeah,
but I will
because
double check that for you.
he's a great back, and let's hope he can still be Nick Chubb. Um, the thing that's most intriguing to me about this team, and I actually watched a ton of their defense, they had the best third down defense in the league last year. And their third down defense on 6+, third and 6+, was ridiculously good. I mean, this is a team, and they, unlike most teams, they return almost everybody. They just have a few changes, but I think if you count the nickel position as a starting position, I think like 9 of the 11 guys are the same guys as last year. So the secondary is exactly the same. They're really, really good. They stunt a lot. They can pressure with their front four. They're very multiple with their front looks and their sub defenses. They move 3 guys around a ton. They move Garrett around, Zadarius Smith around, Okoronkwo around. I mean, these guys are very difficult to figure out. They disguise a ton. On third down, they play basically cover one and cover two, and they get to cover two with big disguise and late rotation. It's a really, really good defense. So, as they work through Watson, whatever he turns out to be, the one thing they do know is they have a defense and a veteran coordinator in Jim Schwartz, who's one of the best in the league.
Schwartz is such a fun coach to watch scheme defense, especially with the kind of players that they've got in Cleveland,
Oh,
Greg. I mean, I'm fascinated to see how much better they can be because they were such an excellent, just
oh,
suffocating unit in
they were.
20.
I watched, like I said, I think I watched 125 plays, like of their defense. Really a fun watch, really fun because they did a they it's one of those things where they did a lot, but it didn't seem like they did a lot because they did it seamlessly. Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
understand what you're saying. It didn't seem complicated for them, even though they were clearly implementing different parts of the defense.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah,
It looked like they were so well coordinated in what they were doing.
yeah. Certainly, Titans fans were sorry to see him go to Cleveland as a senior defensive assistant here for a couple of years. Just following up on the Nick Chubb conversation, they're pretty non-committal about him week one against the Cowboys right now, Greg. But it sounds like they're keeping their cards pretty close to the vest on Nick Chubb and his injury status. Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback situation is one of the most fascinating ones in the NFL.
Yes.
Greg, do they have a good quarterback on the roster?
Well, I'd answer the question this way. Neither quarterback is really a refined timing and rhythm passer, okay? Neither one is that guy. So what does that mean? So now, when you think of your offense and what you want it to be, given that they drafted an offensive tackle with pick 1 and an offensive center who's going to start with the second round pick, Zach Frazier from West Virginia, what is their offense going to look like? It can't be a timing rhythm, offense, quarterback, boom, hit the back foot, get the ball out, because neither guy plays like that. So now, with Arthur Smith there and all the cool run game concepts that he has, it seems to me, and I have no inside information, I could be 100% wrong. I'm not saying this as if I know, and boy, is this a smart statement, but it seems to me that Justin Fields fits more with how they would want to play because he gives you the quarterback run game element, which expands their offense. Now, if Russell Wilson was a great passer, timing and rhythm, that kind of player, I'd say, hey, then maybe it should be Wilson. But neither quarterback is like that. So Fields then gives you more than Wilson.
I'm curious to see what Arthur does there because I also had that initial thought just having seen Arthur, and I know the personnel is obviously different when he was in here in Tennessee, and then when he went to Atlanta, and now in Pittsburgh as the OC. But I also had that thought when they traded for Fields, just the idea that Fields made more sense as the starting quarterback in that kind of system that I've seen Arthur Smith run.
Yeah, so we'll see how it plays out. Like I said, I could be wrong. Defensively, I would expect them to be pretty good.
Yeah.
You know, they still have TJ Watt, who's just a dynamite pass rusher off the left side of the defense. They now have Patrick Queen, a very good linebacker. You know, the other pass rusher, Alex Highsmith, you know, he very quietly last year, I think, had 13, 14 sacks. He's a good player. And there's a classic case of a guy who's just developed over his career. You know, the kind of, and that's why that's one of the reasons why I really look at traits, not necessarily, and this is not 100%, but not necessarily production in college. Because sometimes you can look at a guy and, you know, maybe a guy gets 5 sacks and people go, oh, you only had 5 sacks. The best example of that is Daniil Hunter, who I think had like 5 sacks at LSU. And he's going to, this year, he'll probably go over 100 sacks in his career in the NFL. But, you know, so Highsmith is just such a great example of that. The other kid who really stood out on tape when I watched them, and again, when I saw plays of theirs this summer when I watched, you know, rewatched stuff, was the rookie last year from Wisconsin, Keanu Benton. And he's a second-year player, and he's really good, really good. He's going to be one of the better D tackles in this league going forward.
Cincinnati Bengals finished in 4th place last year with a winning record, and they were able to manufacture some wins that they probably shouldn't have been able to pull off in the absence of Joe Burrow, who missed a fair amount of time. Now Burrow returns healthy. They do, of course, have a new offensive coordinator, even though he's not new to their staff, and Dan Pitcher, who got promoted. And so the same scheme under Zach Taylor is what we expect them to run.
Yep.
But I do think it's interesting, Greg. I saw some comments from Burrow about how they feel like with their personnel, they can be more versatile this year. And it didn't sound like he was taking a shot at Tyler Boyd or anybody else that's played for the Bengals in the last couple of seasons. But I do find that concept interesting on Boyd being such a specific slot player, obviously now in Tennessee, and what that may allow them to do with Jamar Chase, with T. Higgins. And right now, I'm going to butcher the receiver's last name, who's currently scheduled to start for them in the slot.
The Princeton wide receiver. Yes.
Yes.
Well, and they also have Trenton Irwin, who's played a lot of snaps for them. They have Jermaine Burton, who was a 3rd-round pick. You know, so Charlie Jones was a 4th-round pick the year before. They've got a lot of receivers. So we'll see how it all plays out. You know, again, you never know a comment like that, you know, when Burrow makes it, what that means. Obviously, the run game, you know, Mixon is gone. They have Zach Moss. They have Chase Brown, the kid from Illinois, who was a great back his last year in college. You know, Burrow is the guy that makes it all work. I mean, he's at his best, he's a top 3 quarterback in the league without question. And he just makes everything better and different. And the thing about Burrow is you know, I was talking with one of my guys on the matchup show today. We were talking about all the things that quarterbacks do that are just not talked about very much. You know, like when people say he's a game manager or a system quarterback, coaches view those things as a positive. You know, when do you take a shot down the field? When do you change a play at the line of scrimmage? When do you understand a game situation that, hey, now is not the time to push the ball. Now is not the time to be aggressive. You know, all these things go into playing quarterback, in controlling the game, you know, but people hear term, you know, game manager or system quarterback, and they think that's a negative term. They're not negative terms. In fact, they're critically important terms. And Burrow is really, really good at all those things, in addition to being obviously a really good thrower of the football.
We were talking to Brian Callahan today, and you know, obviously running everything through the prism of Levis, but like how long it took that coaching staff to determine. Obviously, everybody knew who Joe Burrow was coming out of college. Easy for me to say. So there was a book on him, but it basically took until about halfway through his rookie season for Callahan and the coaching staff to say, all right, this is what this guy is supposed to look like. This is what we can do with him. And I think people kind of lose sight of that sometimes, that constant evolution of the quarterback position.
Yeah, I mean,
invaluable these in-season reps are.
Just 2 quick points. I remember talking to coaches on the Patriots and telling me that they didn't feel Tom Brady actually became Tom Brady until his 4th year in the league. You know, and that might seem silly to people because he'd already won 2 Super Bowls. But, you know, and you mentioned Levis and talking to Brian Callahan, these are the kinds of things that they're trying to get across to Levis. Here's a guy who's naturally aggressive. That's his mindset. But you have to know when to do that. You have to know when, hey, I can't take a sack here. No matter what happens on this play, maybe the defense will the perfect defense to take away our route concepts. I can't take a sack here. That just can't happen at this point in the game. It's things like that that don't show up, don't seem important if you're just sitting at home as a Titans fan watching the game on TV, or even sitting in Nissan and you're watching the game. There's just certain things in a game that a quarterback has to understand intuitively so he does not hurt his team.
Yeah. To the NFC North quickly, Greg, and we'll move a little bit faster here. The Detroit Lions successfully construct their roster. They win the division last year. Jared Goff has a bit of a career renaissance, and I guess I want to focus mainly on the Lions, even though the Packers are a fascinating team, and of course Caleb Williams is on tap week 1. How much better has Jared Goff gotten as a quarterback in a system based on the amount of variance that we've seen from him across his career?
I don't want to say that he hasn't gotten better, but I think stylistically he's the same. And he was in a great system with the Rams with McVay, and now he's in a great system with Ben Johnson. This is a team, and we've discussed this over the last couple of years, Buck. They're a team that does such a great job with the spacing of their route combinations. And why that's important, particularly against zone coverage, is it really helps define the reads and the throws for the quarterback, because it spreads the defense out. It creates voids and windows to throw the ball. You see those voids and windows, and you're able to throw very often to your primary target. But even if you have to come off your primary, there's still spacing where you can then comfortably see your secondary receiver. So Goff is a pure pocket quarterback, but he's 6'4", 225, and he throws the ball really well. So he is in an absolutely perfect system, and he's playing really efficiently.
From one quarterback to another in Jordan Love, who also gets a nice contract this offseason. Matt LaFleur, I really enjoyed working with him for the 1 year that he was here in Tennessee. And obviously, he is very adept at working at scheming offense and working specifically with the quarterback position. Uh, with Love, Greg, and I can't remember going back to our conversations pre-draft of him coming out of Utah State, but are you seeing the traits for the player kind of elevated in what he's been able to do in a small sample size?
I mean, this might sound bold and controversial to a lot of people. I mean, I did love both his next to last year in college and his last year in college. Okay. His next to last year in college, I thought he could be a top 5 pick. And then his last year, coaching change, it was evident watching the tape, he was not a comfortable player at all. And it showed up on tape. He did not play as well. And therefore, he was a later first round pick. But this kid, and again, here's my point. This kid, in terms of physical, athletic throwing traits, is top 5 in the league. He could be a top 3, 4 quarterback in the league with continued growth this season. I mean, you got to remember, he's a big kid too. We lose sight because college is sending more and more shorter quarterbacks to the league, and it's become accepted in the league now that a guy who's 6'1" like Caleb Williams can play quarterback and be fine. And I'm not saying you can't. Of course you can. We've seen shorter quarterbacks be very, very good. But, sometimes we lose sight of the fact that, Joe Burrow, 6'3", 6'4", Jordan Love, 6'3", 6'4". Drake May, who I got a chance to stand next to at the combine, is a big, big kid. I don't know if you've ever seen him in person. He's 6'4", 225. Those are traits. Those matter. But what I will say about Love, which really stood out to me, as he had that great stretch beginning like week 10, somewhere in that range, where he arguably was as good a quarterback as there was in the league, is he started to see things better pre-snap. You saw him change plays. You saw him recognize the defense. See, this is all part of being a game manager and a system quarterback. The ability to do those kinds of things, and that's where you really started to see the growth, because the physical traits are there.
We're going to spend a lot of time on the Chicago Bears, obviously.
Yeah, we can leave them alone if you want, because we're going to
conversation. That was my plan, and I don't mean to disrespect the Minnesota Vikings, but there is a lot of questions about what that team is going to be, both on a skill position side and at the quarterback position, with Sam Darnold now kind of alone in the room and JJ McCarthy done for the year. Yeah. But we will have plenty of time to talk about that. I will just, Greg, quickly, how much of a benefit is it that they still have Justin Jefferson, because he's going to help make those quarterbacks right more often than not,
Well,
just based on how good of a player he is.
the other thing too is Kevin O'Connell. He's
Yeah.
really good at this. I mean, his background is McVay and Kyle Shanahan, and Kevin is really, really good. And look, Sam Darnold's obviously had issues in his career with seeing things. He's that's been an issue for him. Now, again, some might say, well, hey, guys who have that issue may never get beyond that. But he's with a coach who I think can really help him with what they do formationally, with motions, with route concepts. Um, my guess is, and again, maybe I'll be wrong. My guess is we'll see the best of Sam Darnold. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean he's going to be a top 5 quarterback in the league, but I think we'll see the best of Sam Darnold.
Well, that is an interesting thing to keep an eye on the Minnesota Vikings for. And of course, Titans fans will welcome them to Nashville in middle of November. Greg,
Oh, so by then we should have a pretty good idea by then.
about one team or the other. We
Right.
something. Certainly. I got a lot of questions about the local team too.
Well, I guess we're hoping middle November that's an important game on the schedule.
Greg, I haven't had a lot of important games in November as of late. So, yes, I would like some games of consequence in November this year. Buddy, I appreciate your time as always. Thank you for making us smarter, and we'll do it again next week.
Thanks, Buck. Appreciate it.